Welcome to the Nourished Brain Solutions podcast, where we leverage the power of whole foods-based integrative nutrition to optimize health, mood, energy, and the gut-brain connection. I'm Sarah Fajera, an integrative and functionally minded registered dietitian and owner of Nourished Brain Solutions in upstate New York. Let's get you nourished. Brittyn Coleman, MS, RDN, LD, is a dietitian specializing in autism spectrum disorders and is also a sibling of an individual on the autism spectrum. Through her life and her studies, she realized how much overlap there is between nutrition and autism. During graduate school at the University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center, she specialized in autism spectrum disorders and led her thesis research in food aversions and nutrient intake in children with ASD. There are very few dietitians specializing in ASD across the country, which makes accessibility extremely low. Because of this, she offers video and phone consults to parents and individuals all over the nation to increase the reach of nutrition therapy and nutrition education for families and individuals affected by ASD. She is extremely knowledgeable about autism in relation to diet, biomedical interventions, food selectivity, food sensitivities, gastrointestinal disorders, and even nutrigenetics. So it is such a pleasure to have you here with us, Brittyn, to take a deep dive into nutrition and autism spectrum disorder. So welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be on here today. Thanks.
Yes, you're so welcome. So let's kick off. If you could just tell us a little bit about your background. In your bio, you mentioned you have a brother who has been on this spectrum. So tell us a little more about where you got to where you are today.
Yeah, so I am originally from Oklahoma. You said University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center, but I currently live in San Francisco, California with my husband, and we've been living here for about a little over a year now. But I have been doing my own private practice called Autism Dietitian for a little over 2 years now. And beforehand, I worked in both the clinical setting for adults, inpatient, and then I also worked for an outpatient clinic for children with developmental disabilities in Oklahoma City. And then after that is when I started my own business. But autism and nutrition has always been something that's so close to me and so dear to me. Like you said, I have a brother that's on the spectrum. So he is 24 now. He was diagnosed when he was around 2. The crazy thing is, so my mom is a psychologist and she was already involved in autism spectrum disorders, and that's her specialty. And so whenever he was 2, she was able to recognize those early signs of autism and get him the help he needed. So it was a perfect thing for him because he got that early intervention that he needed and started in speech and OT and ABA and you name it. He also had a dietitian, which is really exciting because autism and nutrition really isn't a huge, wasn't a huge field then. And so he did a lot of diet changes and biomedical interventions, which 20 years ago is huge.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that we even had that available. It can be hard to find sometimes now. So, but anyway, so I just saw the change that it made in him throughout his lifetime and the development that he had, whether it was socially or cognitively, and diet change and nutrition supplements and biomedical treatment was just a huge part of that, which was so exciting to see that it can make such a huge difference. And I was impacted by that too. Siblings can be impacted gut-wise and just all these other different ways that just the typical population isn't affected. So I also had to get my nutrition in line too. And so I wanted to combine the two, and I went into school to become a dietitian and have done so. Yeah.
Wow. So this has been with you for a long time. You've been thinking about nutrition and autism for many years.
I've been involved in the autism community for I guess, a little over 20 years now, since he was
Mm-hmm.
2 when he got diagnosed and is 24 now.
Wow. So, both through your own personal experience and the experiences of those who you work closely with in your community and your practice, what are some of the main challenges that individuals, kids, families are facing when it comes to nutrition and feeding?
Yeah. So with autism, the main thing I would say would be feeding. Um, it's really common for kids with autism to have picky eating or food selectivity. The reason being that a lot of kids with autism, I mean, part of that is sensory sensitivity. And with autism, you can also have a diagnosis of sensory processing disorder, or you can just have some sensory issues in general. When you
Mm.
think about eating, it is one of the most sensory rich experiences that you can have. I mean, you smell the food, you taste it, you feel the crunch in your mouth, you're feeling the texture, the temperature. I mean, all of these things together. If you think about it from a sensory standpoint, if you have some sort of sensory processing disorder, that's going to be extremely overwhelming. And so it can be really hard for kids who, one, can't explain, they might be nonverbal, but also who just have sensory processing disorder and just can't figure out how to manage all of those senses together. And so a lot of times what will happen is they get hooked on either packaged food or uh, fast food or something like that, where they know what to expect from a sensory profile. It's
Mm.
going to be the same every time. A
Mm-hmm.
McDonald's French fry is a McDonald's French fry, and it's going to be that way. Or Pop Tart is going to be the same every single time because it's engineered to be that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so both from sugary or salty or crunchy, whatever profile that is, they're hooked on it, but also they can expect what's coming next, and
Mm.
it just becomes a really hard thing to get them to try new foods because of that.
Hmm. So, with some of those foods you're mentioning, it's as if there's less complexity to process.
Hmm. Right.
That's interesting.
Absolutely. From a sensor, I mean, people, I'm just picking on McDonald's right now just because I mentioned it before, but there are so many food scientists at McDonald's that their
Mm.
job is to make that perfect crunch on that
Right.
French fry and
Yep.
that perfect salty taste. And they want that to release dopamine and they want you to eat that. So, I mean, those are addicting to
Mm.
anybody. They're
Mhm,
delicious.
mhm, mhm.
But whenever you do have some sort of sensory processing issue, it's going to be even more so addicting because from a sensory standpoint, it's perfect, but from a
Yeah.
nutrient standpoint, it's awful.
Okay,
So
yep.
that becomes a big issue, and is kind of the thing that starts it all. A lot of times is the selective eating.
Mhm. So what ends up happening, when I'll just say child, and then if you
Mhm.
wanna add to that, when a child is struggling with sensory processing disorder and picky eating, how does that manifest? What are you seeing if someone comes to you, say, in your practice?
Mhm.
What does it look like?
Yeah. So I will start saying I specialize in children pediatrics. I
Okay.
do see some young adults as well
Mhm.
because they're still struggling. If they
Yeah.
weren't given early intervention with eating or whatever it may be, they just are still having a hard time with it. And so I try to help out parents or young adults too if I can. But I usually do see kids. I would say 2 to 10 is my most populated age.
Mhm.
But what ends up happening is, so let's say that you get hooked on all of these processed foods. You're only eating these foods that will accommodate your sensory processing issues. And now you're eating crackers and chips and french fries and chicken nuggets and pasta.
Mm.
First of all, we have to think about, well, and kids on the spectrum, a lot of times we call these the blonde foods because they only like to eat foods that are blonde or tan. It's really interesting. So, um, if you just take a look at their diet, a lot of times it's just one color. So,
Mhm.
but what we know about that is when we don't have a diversity of color, we're missing out on so many nutrients, and with those foods, we're missing out on so much fiber, and it's a lot of just processed carbohydrates that can cause blood sugar imbalances and can feed yucky bacteria in the gut and yeast overgrowth and things like that we just need to be thinking about what nutrients and what food is feeding that child's body, and more importantly, how is that food feeding the microbiome, and how does that relate to the brain? So the major issue there I see is microbiome disruption and imbalance of bacteria like dysbiosis or overgrowth of yeast in the gut. A lot of times I'll see candida, and I test for those too. I can go into more detail about that. But the next thing that's usually disrupted is the gut biome.
Okay, got it. So when you see kids, how often are they having digestive issues?
Oh, I would say 90% of the kids that come to me have some sort of GI issue, and almost always it's constipation. And I see diarrhea sometimes in kids with autism, but I mean, almost always constipation. But at the same time, I mean, they're not getting enough fiber that, to help them pass that stool. A lot of times it's lack of fiber that's causing that. And then, I mean, on top of that, other GI issues that are underlying there, but fiber being the main thing.
Yeah. So let's start to think a little bit about individualized care for kids with autism, because you and I as dietitians, there's some general guidelines that apply to many people or most people, but also I think we both also see the value of really individualized protocols, specific foods and recipes and supplementation, things like that. So when you're working with ASD, where do you really see the general guidelines working? Like eat more fiber, right? Lots of fruits and vegetables, color. And where do you find that you often really need to individualize things for people?
Right. So there are general guidelines that work. Yeah. More fiber, the right amount of protein, the right amount of calories. I mean, to their core, they're a human and still need the same, about the same requirements as everybody else. But when it comes to diet, we have to really look at, and this goes for anybody too, but we have to look at gut profile. We can look at genetic makeup and how they break down their nutrients. We need to look at how selective their diet is and what nutrients are they missing out on. Do we need to, if diet's not going to be an immediate change, can we use supplements to help them with that? And then again, we have to think about from a genetic profile, what supplements do they need and how can they absorb those their best. And then we have to think about their current nutrient stores. I mean, there's so many things that we have to think about before we can prescribe an individualized diet and an individualized supplement regimen for these kiddos. They also are more likely, because they have more gut issues, they're more likely to have food sensitivities too. And so just a typical diet may not be appropriate for them because it could feature a lot of foods that they have sensitivities to.
Okay. Yep. Okay, so you mentioned, Brittyn, that the microbiome is really important in autism. And then you just mentioned the idea of a gut profile. So for anyone who's not familiar with what the microbiome is, can you just give us a little bit of information about why that's important to autism? What it is about our guts that seems to really make a difference.
Absolutely. So we all have trillions and trillions and trillions of bacteria that live inside our gut. And there's certain bacteria that live in the small intestine, and there are certain bacteria that live in the large intestine. But a majority of that bacteria does live in the large intestine. And so what we're able to see, a lot of the research within the past 15 to 20 years, which isn't a long time for research. I mean, it's a long time when you think about it, but for research, we usually typically want a lot longer than that. But it's just, there's so much coming out now that we need to be, researching and studying that we just didn't know before. And so the importance between the bacteria in our brain has been being studied in the gut-brain connection. So those bacteria that live in our gut, we want the very best bacteria. There are certain strains of bacteria that are better for our gut, and we would rather see there because they help keep our gut healthy. They help us digest our food. They help keep our immune system strong. I mean, there's so many things that they're doing. But then we can also have bad bacteria. And depending on your environment or your diet or a lot of things that happen to you throughout your lifetime that can shape the bacteria that you have in your gut. Like if you were a C-section baby, or if you were born vaginally, or if you were breastfed, or all these things that start so early on in life that can actually have a big impact on your gut biome. So what we're seeing is that those good bacteria are very, very helpful for us and can help us be optimally healthy. But those bad bacteria can release different toxins, they can release different gases, even, and can cause a lot of inflammation in the gut. And that's not just localized to the gut, but whenever we start having that much inflammation there, it can start to inflame those gastrointestinal cells. And whenever those cells are inflamed and puffy, I mean, think of anything that's infected or inflamed, they can start to spread out. And what happens is you can have these tiny, tiny little perforations in the gut, which can lead to what's called leaky gut, which I see in a lot of my clients, not all of them. But whenever we do have those little tiny perforations, things like toxins or toxic gases or food proteins even can bypass that barrier. And it shouldn't be. It should be completely closed. There should not be any opening in the gastrointestinal tract. So what we see is like a lot of those bacteria or toxins can cross over that blood-brain barrier. They can travel through the vagus nerve. There's so many ways that they can get to the brain and cause issues with cognition, issues with focus, or even verbalization and massive brain fog and developmental or development as well. And so we really have to look at the gut first when we think about brain, especially in this population.
And it sounds like, in ASD, one of the really big causes for an altered gut microbiome or collection of bacteria really is both a lack of diversity and then possibly, of course, not enough good fuel for the good bacteria, not enough fiber. But also it sounds like just having some of those more processed foods that can also wreak havoc.
Right.
Is that right? Are those the big things you think that cause some trouble sometimes? Anything else that you see?
Yeah, I mean, I link everything back to the gut. And
Yep.
I mean, everything comes back to the gut. And that goes for any person, but especially for autism. I mean, we're just really, the research is pointing to dysbiosis and all of these things going on in the gut that it's impossible to ignore. And diet, it could start with diet, but it could also start with, let's say we have a child who was born C-section. I mean, I was born C-section. You can't control that a lot of the time, but you do miss out on some bacteria. Whenever you pass through the vaginal canal, you get so much bacteria from your mom. And let's say that they had an infection when they were born and had to be on antibiotics. Antibiotics can't choose, they're going to wipe out the whole gut and you're not going to have those good bacteria. A lot of times you'll see bad bacteria, yeast grow back in there. You're kind of just set up to have a bad gut profile. Not saying that causes autism at all, but that's a common story that I hear in a lot of my kiddos. They've been on multiple rounds of antibiotics. They have had a very selective diet their entire life. They've struggled with chronic ear infections, with chronic strep infections, all these other things. And then around 2 to 3 years old, they develop autism as well. It's a common story that I see. And so, I mean, think about the common denominator. Common denominator is gut health. So, I always just bring it back to the gut.
Yeah. So really one of the reasons why individualized care matters so much is you want to know how much attention to put on gut health. And specifically, now we're at the point where we can individualize strategies to intervene, right? Whether there's overgrowth or poor growth of different bacteria, because that's what you're doing with those gut profiles, right? Is taking a snapshot to see what's there and what's low and what's high. Is that correct?
Exactly. And it's so important that we're able to see the data, because before we could see the data, or before we had access to, those labs, or we even knew that that's something that we'd want to test with, a lot of times practitioners who would see kids with autism would just have one protocol that all of them would follow, or one diet that all of them would follow. And you know what? It helped a lot of people, but there's still this huge subset of clients just didn't work for. The gluten-free, casein-free diet didn't work for some kids. It does work for other kids.
Yep.
It's a higher likelihood that it'll work for kids on the spectrum because we see that a lot, that they have food sensitivities to gluten and dairy. But I have clients who have done it for years and never noticed a difference. And so it's important that we don't just throw one blanket approach at them, because there's so many things that, and so many moving parts, nutrient deficiency and gut issues and their specific diet and genetic makeup, all these things. It wouldn't work for everybody if you just did one approach. And so that's what I really press in my practice, is that we have to have an individualized approach, because all these kids are so different. It's called an autism spectrum for a reason. Right. It's not just one diagnosis. There are so many diagnoses in between. And, one kid with severe autism who's nonverbal is not even close to the same as a child who maybe is high functioning, not technically Asperger's syndrome anymore. It's still under the autism spectrum, but it's just a different subtype of autism. So you can't treat them the same.
I think there's probably a lot more we could say about individualized care, but I want to actually ask you a little more about the biomedical piece, biomedical testing, and how that comes into your individualized approach. Just so people understand a little more what resources might be out there and what you can do with the information. Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. So the most common panel I run is called the GI map, and that is a stool analysis, and it looks at the amount of DNA of whatever particular pathogen that we're measuring. So it tells us very specifically if there are, what bacteria living in the gut, whether it's good or bad, looking at parasites, looking at, the phyla of the bacteria. It looks at the bad bacteria that we don't want living there, fungi and yeast and viruses, and even digestive function and GI markers and immune response and leaky gut and all these other things that just one stool sample can tell us. And so that is one that I always do with my clients. I love to start that as our baseline, because there is so much lying there in the gut that I want to look there first. So the GI map is my staple that I do with nearly all of my clients. And then some other testing that I offer, one is called SpectraCell, and SpectraCell offers a micronutrient panel. And through that micronutrient panel, you're able to test 35 different vitamins and minerals and look at intracellular storage of these nutrients instead of extracellular like serum. Intracellular is a better marker long-term of our nutrient stores. And so we're able to look at those vitamins and minerals. And then I also like to do an omega check as well, so that we can look at omega stores, because those are commonly low in kids on the spectrum. And then I also use food sensitivity testing. I use a test called the MRT, the mediator release test. And why that's so special, instead of just testing IgG antibodies, which is what a lot of food sensitivity tests will do, it tests IgG, IgA, IgM, and T cell reaction. So it looks at inflammation response and not just one particular antibody. And that is a lot more accurate than just testing one antibody. It doesn't test IgE, that's allergy, but that's always just a routine blood draw that we can do at their physician's office. And then I also do some labs from Great Plains. Great Plains offers a panel called the OAT panel, organic acids test, and it's almost an indirect way of looking at what bacteria or what yeast is in the gut. It measures the metabolites of those bacteria and yeast instead of measuring the DNA. So it's just looking at a different way, like what toxins are they producing? What toxic gases are they producing? So it's a lot of great information. You can just they match together really well, which is nice. But through Great Plains, you can also do a toxic metals panel, which I do for my clients. To be honest, I don't. I know the autism community really sees or really values heavy metals, but it's not something I commonly see in my clients. But it's always good to rule it out. So, and then the last thing that I can do through Great Plains is test for environmental toxins. So thinking about pesticides and what toxins are coming through in the water or contaminants and all of these other things that might be affecting a child environmentally that we could change. So there's so much that we can do.
Stuff.
Oh, and genetic panel too.
And genetic,
that's the last thing. So with SpectraCell, I can test for the MTHFR gene, which is a gene that affects the way that we metabolize folate and folic acid. That is commonly affected in kids on the spectrum. But I can also do a separate panel that if they have 23andMe data or Ancestry.com data, I can take the raw data and run it through what's called Pure Genomics, which is a system by Pure Encapsulations, which is a really great supplement company, very pure and clean products. And it helps us analyze what specific products they should be using. They don't have to be pure encapsulations, but just from a diet and supplement standpoint, what we should be focusing on. It just kind of gives us a cause. It doesn't show us results that could be used immediately. Well, what I mean by that, I guess, is it doesn't show us the stores of nutrients. It just shows us the path that they're taking to get there. It's just a helpful piece of information that we can use.
Yeah, it gives you clues. Okay, I want to ask you, because, it sounds like you have so many incredible tools that you're integrating in. So I want to ask you specific questions about a couple of these. Is that okay to dive in?
Absolutely.
So you mentioned the omega panel, that you're looking at fatty acids. So I'm curious, what are the most common imbalances that you see with fatty acid status, and why does it matter in ASD?
Great question.
Yeah.
So with the omega check, it will look at total blood omega, and then it'll also break it down into like omega 3s and omega 6s. And then it'll also look at all these just different pieces of it. A lot of times what I'll see is that omega check as a whole, which is total blood, EPA plus DHA and EPA, all of those together, I see that almost always is low. And there was a really recent study. Let me see if I can find it so I can send it to you. But
that would be great.
It was looking at 3 groups of kids, or 2 groups of kids. One kid or one group had autism spectrum disorder and the other group did not. And they took the same amount of omega fatty acids over the same amount of time. And they saw that in the typical population, the number for their omegas grew appropriately. It was, trending upward. But in kids with autism, it actually was not doing that as quickly. They were absorbing them a lot slower, and those stores were growing a lot slower. And so there must be, what they were saying is there must be some sort of issue digesting or metabolizing omega fatty acids in kids with autism, whether they can't do it appropriately, or maybe they have gut issues that are impairing the absorption of that, or they can't break them down because they don't have the digestive enzymes, or whatever's going on. Wow. A lot of times kids with autism just have lower stores of omega fatty acids. And so being able to see that total omega number is really helpful so that we can decide what amount we need to be giving, because some kids just need a lot more than others so that they can keep that omega check high and in normal range. So when it's low, if anyone here has ever been low in omega fatty acids, it doesn't feel good. You feel so fatigued. You can just feel like you have so much brain fog. You feel tired. You feel grumpy, and you just do not feel your best. I have had my omegas low, and the brain fog for me personally was so intense, and I couldn't figure out what it was for the longest time. This was before I got into all of this. But once I did and I corrected that, it just made such a huge difference for me personally that I couldn't even imagine what a child with autism would be feeling like if they already have some neurological issues going on. And then on top of that, they had some brain fog from, omega fatty acids that could be repleted so easily. I mean,
Right.
they would
Yes.
just feel so awful. And I am so clouded and I just feel for them so much. But it's something that we can fix, and something that's so vital for development too.
Yeah.
Important for fetuses to have omega fatty acids as well. I mean, it's just so important for cognitive development and function.
Yes. Yes. So those early years really matter. So this is
Oh,
really, I think, a good example with omega 3s because they're really used during brain development, where it really makes a lot of sense to have someone supporting you early on versus just trying to kind of do your best, for years and years and years. Some things get really bad to seek out help because, clearly this information that you're leveraging gives you priceless direction with
right.
dosing and then where to
Exactly.
look, right? What about with the MRT or with food sensitivities? What are some of the common imbalances that you see? Well, or common reactions, I should say, that you
Yeah.
see there? What comes up a lot?
Well, the most common is dairy. Everyone wants to
Mm,
think that gluten is the most common, but I I'm surprised almost when I see a dairy come back normal.
wow.
And a lot of the research too shows us that kids with autism are more affected by dairy than gluten. So,
Hmm.
and I believe it. I completely believe it.
Huh.
So, I think gluten is really problematic for a lot of kids, but not everybody. I mean, that goes for anything. But
Mm,
so I commonly see dairy triggered very high. Gluten or gluten containing grains are often high. Soy, corn is often very, very high as well. And
mm.
a lot of times, too, what the MRT does, too, is it tests food chemicals.
Yes.
And that can be either artificial chemicals like dyes and artificial sugars and things like that, but it can also test for chemicals that are naturally occurring. So, for example, like solanine
Mm-hmm.
is a food chemical that is high in nightshades. So it can test specifically for that too. But a lot of times I'll see things like food dyes and artificial sweeteners come back especially high. Now they're inflammatory for everybody, but
Mm-hmm.
especially inflammatory for a lot of kids on the spectrum. I see that with ADHD too. A lot of kids are very, very
Mm-hmm.
sensitive to artificial dyes and flavors and
Mm-hmm.
sweeteners and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So this really allows you to, start an elimination diet on steroids almost, right? Because
Yeah,
I feel
it's a
like,
shortcut. It's a
yeah,
total shortcut, which is nice.
yeah, yes, yes. There's less guessing. Just get to the
Mhm.
root of it and design a plan, right? Design a plan.
Yeah, and it's so hard when I have a kid who's eating 5 to 10 foods
Right.
to say, okay, let's go on a gluten-free, dairy-free diet, and all
Oh,
they're eating is bread and milk. So,
yes.
I mean, they're not just going to. A lot of people will say, just take it out. They'll start eating eventually. They'll eat when they're hungry. But when it comes to sensory sensitivity, that's not the case. They're not going to give up. They're going
Wow.
to end up in the hospital or the ER because they are so dehydrated or they're malnourished because
Wow.
it's not just a choice. It's there's more than that there. And so you have
Mm-hmm.
to really realize that you can't just strip a kid who has sensory processing disorder or autism of all their foods because they're
Right.
not going to eat no matter what.
Right.
So
Right.
it's really important that you add before you take out. And so by doing the MRT too, it gives us an idea of what's necessary, what's not necessary. Let's not mess with something if it's not necessary.
Mm-hmm.
And let's target it and find some alternatives that we can make and transition them onto new foods
Mm-hmm.
um, that they could tolerate. So a lot of times what I'll say to my clients is right now we're making better choices. In the future, we're going to make our best choices because for a
Mm-hmm.
kid who's only eating chicken nuggets and french fries right now, and they're only McDonald's french fries or whatever it is, we can't go from eating that to just this perfect Mediterranean diet. There's no way that that's going to
Yeah.
happen. We
Yeah.
just have to make some switches to make
Mm.
their constant. Like we can maybe switch over to an organic grilled chicken nugget instead.
Mhm.
Make those gradual changes. And if that's the food that's sustaining them the most, we're still making a big difference because
Right.
we've changed
Yep.
over to a better option
Yep.
while we have the time to work on our best options. And so
Mhm.
I think the MRT just gives me a way that I can target that and figure out what we need to prioritize and what we can maybe put on the back burner in the meantime.
Mhm. Okay, wow. So using both this approach with food, where it can be really gradual, but also targeted and really strategic, bringing in supplementation as needed, integrating the finding from biomedical testing. What
Mhm.
are some of the really, benefits or outcomes that you see from approaching ASD in this way?
Yeah.
What does the
Well,
journey
so we've
look
talked
like?
about diet quite a bit. Supplements are
Yeah.
also a big part of that. And
Yeah.
they're my short term solution for when diet isn't an immediate, we're not able to change it overnight. So I
Hmm.
didn't touch on supplements, but just want to give them a little shout out
Yeah,
because
please.
getting the right supplements can be so huge for some kids, getting them the nutrients that they need or targeting that dysbiosis or yeast overgrowth in a very natural way that doesn't cause major die off or anything like that. So
Mm.
I just wanted to give a quick shout out to supplements
Mhm.
because I use
Mhm.
them a lot in my practice. I'm a minimalist with them, but when they're needed, we use them and we use them appropriately. So
Yeah.
um, both, finding the right diet and the right supplement makes a huge, huge difference for kids. And um, I've seen that both clinically in my practice and then, also personally with my brother too.
Mm.
But I have a little tab on my website. So if you go to autismdietitian.com, there's a little tab that says success stories. And I, of course, can't share all of those today, but that's a
Yeah.
great way to just see what nutrition has done for a lot of my clients. And the main thing that a lot of people are saying is that their children are happier, they're more focused. Verbalization is a huge thing that I see, especially with the introduction of omega fatty acids. A lot of
Mm.
times, children will start to make those connections and start either talking or babbling. Of course, I can't promise that for everybody, but I do see that quite a bit.
Wow.
And meeting a lot of their speech and occupational therapy goals quicker because uh, that groundwork of nutrition and treating the roots of everything else is going to help those flowers and those leaves flourish because
Yeah.
you're giving the body the nutrient they need. The
Right.
outcomes are going to be so much better. um, Immune system is generally a lot better.
Mm.
Getting sick a lot less often,
Yeah. Yep.
but focus and cognition are two things that really improve. I can never claim that I'm going to solve or cure autism. That's not what I do. And that's, if anyone tells you that, run because
Mm.
that is, right now we don't know of a cure. I wish I could I wish I could cure autism
Mhm.
and I would happily be out of a job if I could do that. But right now, the best we can do is just give the child these, set them up to just be their very best self and to
Mhm.
feel their best and
Mhm.
have their healthiest GI possible and have
Mhm.
the healthiest brain and just the healthiest body that they can. And so that's what I want for my clients. And gastrointestinal issues is another thing I specialize in. I mean, getting them regular is my goal. I want them to feel their very best GI wise too. And so there are just so many, it depends on the person, but there are just so many um, benefits that you can see. And so it's different for every person and what you're struggling with. But I just love seeing the kid happier and feel better
Mm. Mhm.
and
Mhm.
just the parents happier because they feel like their child is getting the right nutrients. They're eating more, they're eating a wider variety, they're going to the bathroom daily, and it's not, causing some major pain or, um, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
behavioral
Yeah.
issues too.
Yeah.
But anyway, I
It's
could go on and on,
amazing.
but
It's amazing
it's
how
it's
far-reaching
really
nutrition
exciting to
is.
see how much nutrition can play a role in
Mhm.
autism. It's
Mhm.
really exciting.
So for more success stories, more about how this plays out, your website is autismdietitian.com.
Mhm.
Where
Yes.
else can people find you if they're really interested in this? Where should they go to learn more?
Yeah, my website has a lot of awesome resources resources on there. It also has you can download a free resource whenever you get onto my website for the first time. There's a great download there. But also, I'm the most active on Facebook. I have a page, the Autism Dietitian Facebook page. And so I would say go there. I'm posting daily some really great inspirational articles, some of my blog posts, some research, some helpful tips. That is where most of my clientele is on Facebook. I do have an Instagram account, and I think I have a Twitter account too. Those are more inactive just because I have so much more of my audience that's on Facebook. And so I just really like to connect there, and it feels like a big community there. So find me on Facebook, find me on my website, of course. And if anybody is interested in either referring a client to me, or if seeing me yourself for your child, you can schedule a free 30-minute consult on my website as well. So I offer that to all my new clients so that I can just give them a good idea of what we'd be working on and what I'm all about, just so they can know what my goals are for them. And so I can also understand their goals too.
Yes, that is so important because this is not a one size fits all. It's the furthest thing from. Yes. So in closing, Brittyn, of this info-packed podcast, all of these great resources, ideas, what would you leave people with if there was a message of, perhaps hope or a possibility? If someone is struggling with nutrition, with someone they love, what would you say?
I would say that's normal.
Yeah.
With autism, you're going to have struggles, and it's just the way that you respond to them and the way that you view them. I think that it's easy to get bogged down by a lot of therapies in autism. You have speech and occupational therapy and ABA and social groups and a GI doctor and a dietitian, all these things. And it feels so overwhelming. And I see that. And I remember growing up with my brother and seeing all the therapies that he had to do, and it was a lot. And so what I always like to tell my clients is sometimes we'll get some really severe results back on these panels. And the way that I want to view it is hopeful, thinking there's so much here that we can correct, and there's so much here that we can work with. It gives us so much hope that there's a lot of difference that we can make. So I always just encourage my clients to view it in that light, is that it's okay to be overwhelmed. That's why you have, some healthcare providers that are here on your side that are helping you overcome this. It's not all on you, but just take those struggles as opportunities to be better in the future. And it's all the way you look at it, and all the way that you have a good healthcare team around you to support you. Because I love being a part of my client's life, and I a lot of times play more of a role than just dietitian. I play the role of counselor and friend, and sometimes they just need a little bit of support and community. And so it's okay if you feel lonely and you feel stressed out. Just finding the right team and finding the right support is, the best thing you can do for yourself. And your family.
Knowing you're not alone.
Yeah, you're not alone. There's a huge community out there. I want to plug in actually a really awesome app that I've heard of recently. Do it. It's called Wolf and Friends, and it is quite amazing. And I have been so inspired by it. It's an app that was built by, I believe it's two mothers who have children that have developmental disabilities. I think one has autism, but it's when you sign up as a parent, it's not only a way to connect with other parents who have kids with developmental disabilities or autism or ADHD or whatever it is. You can connect with parents in your area, but you can also find specialists there too. So like I'm on there, my business is on there. And so people in my area can find me easily. I see clients outside of San Francisco, of course, across the nation, but it's just a good way to get hooked in with good specialists, hooked in with a good community. I think there are like local meetups. It's just really great. So if somebody's struggling to find community and just needs some support there, for people who understand where they're coming from and struggles that they have, I would say definitely join that. It's free for parents, which is
Oh,
cool.
phenomenal.
So,
So we'll have
not
to link
sponsored,
that.
just
Yeah.
really think that they're awesome. So
Yes, that's great to know. Thank you. So send me the link for that because I want to put it in
yeah,
the below the episodes. People can go there and navigate as well as your website. So
definitely.
Brittyn Coleman, thank you. Thank you,
Nice.
thank
Thank you
you.
so
You're
much.
really, really a gift. And yeah, I would also encourage people to go and check out your website, your Facebook page, plug in, get into community, and don't go it alone. Because as you can tell, there's lots out there to explore that can help. So really appreciate your time, Brittyn, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so
You're
much.
welcome. Hi there, Sarah Fahara here, owner of Nourished Brain Solutions. It's my goal with this podcast to explore strategies for empowered and well-informed food and eating decisions. If this information has been supportive to you, please share with your friends and leave me a review up on iTunes. To learn more about how food is impacting the way you feel on a day-to-day basis, head over to my website at www.nourishedbrainsolutions.com for a free copy of my food mood journal. We'll see you soon.